Brildain's eyes snap open. For a wild, hopeful second, she clings to the idea that she's back in her room, the gentle blue glow of her monitors, the comforting hum of her rig filling the space. But as her fingers search the sheets, they brush against something else entirely, a thick woven blanket, soft and warm, settling around her like an unexpected comfort. The air is different too, dense and still, lacking the hum of her old room, settling over her with a faint chill. She blinks, her gaze drifting up, and the stone ceiling looms above, vast and unyielding, grounding her back into the strange reality of the tower. She sits up slowly, her stomach twisting. Shadows creep across the unfamiliar room, pooling in the corners, stretching up the walls. She drags her eyes to the narrow window, where a weak gray light filters in, illuminating just enough to confirm the truth she doesn't want to see. It's real. It's all real. The tower, the maze, the endless stone halls. The sick certainty presses in on her, settling heavily on her chest. A hollow ache tugs at her, whispering that she's alone, stranded in this cold, silent place that's so far from everything she knows. She forces herself to breathe, her fingers digging into the bed, grounding herself in the solid, painful reality of it. She's never felt more cut off, more out of place. A small, bitter laugh bubbles up inside her. She thought she knew isolation, but this is something else entirely. How did I even get here? Her own voice sounds strange in her mind, echoing against the stone walls. What did I do to end up here? She closes her eyes, searching for some scrap of familiarity, some reassurance that any of this makes sense, but it's like grasping at smoke. The tower looms around her, silent, like it's holding its breath, waiting to see what she'll do. A flicker in the corner of her eye makes her look up. And there I am, glitching softly into view at the foot of her bed, my hologram flickering slightly before settling with a smirk. "Morning, Brill," I say, my tone easy, light. "Ready for round two?" She blinks, relief and disbelief flashing across her face, and for the first time since she woke up, there's something close to recognition in her eyes. "Phantus?" she whispers, her voice soft and shaky. You're still here?" "Still here," I reply, shrugging like it's no big deal, like I've been here all along and she can depend on that. "Looks like you're stuck with me. Guess we're both in for the ride." I grin, letting a bit of the usual playfulness slip back in. "One strange room at a time. We'll figure it out." She lets out a slow, shaky breath, a flicker of steadiness returning to her gaze. "Yeah, okay. Together." But before she can fall too deeply into that brief calm, I clear my throat, shifting the tone with a teasing grin. "And speaking of basics," I say, my voice cutting through her daze, "when's the last time you had breakfast?" Her brow furrows like she's trying to remember what the word even means. "Breakfast?" I sigh, rolling my eyes. "Yes. Food? You know, that thing you keep forgetting to consume. I'm not about to let you turn to dust on me halfway through the day." I jerk my head toward the door, giving her a look. "Come on, let's see if the tower has anything edible. I can't have you passing out on me." She huffs, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. It's faint, but it's there. With a sigh, she swings her legs over the edge of the bed, eyes scanning the floor for the shoes she'd found yesterday. But where she expects to see them, there's nothing. Just a soft, folded pair of fluffy socks, sitting neatly by her bed, almost like they've been waiting for her. She blinks, frowning slightly, but reaches down and pulls them on, their warmth sinking into her feet, a small comfort in the tower's cold, unfamiliar air. Dragging herself to her feet, I lead her out, her steps muted as we move into the tower's dim, echoing halls, each one twisting deeper, shadowed, absorbing our presence. Her eyes narrow as a faint mist appears, swirling softly around the next corner, shimmering in the low light. "What's that?" she whispers, more to herself than me, and drifts forward, the faint scent of bergamot and orange curling around us. She rounds another corner, catching the mist again, trailing down the hall in delicate wisps, the scent deepening, warm and earthy, drawing her further in. We wind through corridor after corridor, her steps picking up as the fog thickens, curling around her ankles, mingling with that intoxicating perfume. And then, With one last turn, she stops, her eyes widening at the sight before us. The room unfurls into a massive bathhouse, spreading out like a dreamscape. Pools of steaming water ripple in gentle tears, soft light glistening on their surfaces, casting everything in a warm, golden haze. Stone pillars rise silently around the pools, like ancient sentinels standing guard in the mist. The air is thick and warm, and with each breath, the scent of bergamot, orange, and the faint earthiness of patchouli wraps around her, inviting her to sink into it. She steps forward, her fingers grazing the edge of a smooth stone pillar as she takes it all in, her eyes drinking in the glimmering pools, the heavy warmth of the air. It's like stepping into a scene from another world. Yet somehow, it feels as though it's been waiting here, just for her. A hidden sanctuary. Oh, wow. The words slip out of her as she steps forward, her gaze sweeping over the intricate tiles lining the floor. Painted in deep blues and greens, they mimic the ocean, rippling with patterns that seem to move and shift like waves. She pauses, fingers brushing the stone, her skin warmed by the heat that rises from the pools, the mist curling around her like a soft, gentle touch. I drift up beside her, watching as she takes in every detail with that quiet awe. "You've seen this before?" I ask, keeping my tone casual. But something in me waits, watching the way she looks at it, like it's something out of a long-buried memory. She nods slowly, her voice almost a whisper. "It's like the bathhouse from Spirited Away." Her gaze is distant and lingering on the steam, on the way the light catches the surface of the water. "I used to watch that movie all the time," she murmurs, her voice soft, almost as if she's talking to herself. "I loved it. It felt like stepping into another world, like I could just disappear just for a while." Her fingers trace the edge of a pool, watching the ripples spread and fade, soft and mesmerizing. The bathhouse around us grows sharper, more defined, the colors deepening as her focus lingers, as if the tower itself is responding, taking shape from her memories. "Well," I say, smirking as I drift a bit closer, "seems the tower's tuned into your tastes. Perfect timing for a dip, don't you think?" She hesitates, throwing me a wary look, the hint of a frown tugging at her lips. "I wasn't exactly planning on a bath." "Oh, come on, Brill," I say, leaning in with a grin. "After all that running around yesterday? You reek." I pinch my nose dramatically. "You've got two choices. Hop in or turn the rest of the tower against you with that stench. Your call." Her mouth opens and she stares at me, a mix of shock and indignation flashing in her eyes. But I hold her gaze, hands on my hips, eyebrows raised. "You heard me. Get in there, and don't make me repeat myself." She lets out a huff, rolling her eyes as she mutters something I pretend not to catch. But finally, with a reluctant sigh, she gives in. She toes off her socks, shuffling out of her clothes, and setting them aside in a tidy pile. Then walks toward the pool's edge, her bare feet silent against the warm stone. "Fine," she grumbles, glancing over her shoulder with a wary look. "But if anything jumps out of that water, it's your fault." "Relax," I say, my voice dropping to a playful murmur as I lean back, giving her a half smile. "I'll keep any monsters at bay. You just enjoy it." She dips a toe in, and a small, surprised gasp slips from her lips as the warmth rushes over her skin, an instant, soothing balm that seems to melt her tension away. Slowly, she lowers herself into the pool, letting the water rise around her shoulders, her hair floating like a bloody halo. The steam curls up around her, softening every edge, and she closes her eyes, sinking back against the smooth, hot stone. Her breaths slow, deepen, her face growing softer as the warmth wraps around her. The mist drapes over her like silk, her skin catching the golden light in gentle, glowing ripples. She looks like she's drifting into a dream, her fingers tracing slow, lazy patterns on the water's surface, sending delicate waves radiating out from her touch. "See?" I murmur, watching her with a smirk, though my tone is softer, almost reverent. "Not so bad, right?" She doesn't respond at first, her eyes still closed, a small, contented smile playing at her lips. "It's incredible," she says at last. her voice barely above a whisper. It feels like I'm bathing in liquid satin. She tips her head back, letting the mist settle over her face, each breath slow, as if the weight of the tower has finally let her go, if only for a moment. She doesn't see it, but the walls around her grow clearer, the tiles gleaming, the air filling with that subtle hum, as if the space itself is drawn to her, grounding itself in her presence, like it's solidifying just to keep her here a little longer. As I watch her, I drift a bit closer, the steam blurring my edges, wrapping around us both like a veil. You should do this more often, I say, my voice quiet, slipping into something softer than I intended. Let yourself relax. She stirs, a faint smile on her lips. Maybe, she murmurs, her tone contented as she traces the edge of the pool, her fingers trailing across the surface, catching the light in soft ripples. For a moment, the silence stretches, the water lapping softly around her, each movement gentle, suspended. But just as the quiet settles, she opens her eyes, a small sigh escaping her as she shifts, breaking the stillness. She sits up slowly, letting the water slip away as she reaches for a length of rope hanging from a tag out of the mist. A simple mechanism carved from old wood. She tugs gently and water pours down from a carved spout above, warm and glistening as it spills over her hair, cascading in aggressive waves. Her breath catches as the warmth envelops her, water streaming down her shoulders, catching the light in a way that makes every drop seem to glow. She tips her head back, eyes closed, her face serene as the water falls over her, washing away the last traces of tension. I watch her, transfixed, barely aware of the small, involuntary hitch in my own breath. She's oblivious, utterly wrapped in the sensation, the calm, the soft, golden light that seems to deepen as she grounds the space, as if her very presence is anchoring it in reality. Finally, she opens her eyes, letting out a slow breath as she steps out of the pool, droplets sliding down her arms and legs, catching the warm light like she's woven from water and light. Reaching for a towel, soft linen that drapes around her in loose, graceful folds, she wraps herself up, her movements slower, more deliberate, a satisfied lightness settling over her. Well, she says, a small, contented smile tugging at her lips, guess it was worth it after all. I shake off the spell, snapping back to my usual tone as I hover nearby, giving her my best nonchalant grin. Glad you're finally taking my advice, I say, adding just a hint of sarcasm. She rolls her eyes, but there's a softness in her expression, as her fingers trail along the stone walls, each step lighter as we head back toward the hall. For the first time, her curiosity seems unguarded, like she's opened whatever strange surprise the tower has waiting around the next corner. The air still carries that faint warmth, and the scent of patchouli clings to us as we leave the bathhouse. Her steps are light, her curiosity awake, and for once she seems more at ease, letting her fingers trace along the walls as we move further down the corridor. I expect the tower to shift on us, to twist the halls into something new, but for once the path is steady, almost inviting. After a few turns, a small unmarked door appears to our right, cracked just enough to reveal a faint glow inside. She glances at me, a faint, curious smile, tugging at her lips as she nudges the door open. Inside is a cozy, unexpected little kitchen, shelves lined with dusty mugs, counters worn from use, and in the center of it all, a lone coffee pot sitting on the counter as if it's been waiting for us. Brill steps forward, her eyes narrowing as the warm, rich aroma of fresh coffee fills the room, unmistakable and shockingly real. Just as she crosses the threshold, the pot lets out a quiet, satisfied hiss and begins to bubble, brewing as though it knows she's here. The scent is magnetic, almost hypnotic, pulling her in. Her steps quicken, her face softening, and I watch as she reaches for a chipped mug on the counter, her fingers curling around it with a reverence I haven't seen since we arrived. She pours herself a measure, cradling the mug in both hands, her eyes fixed on it like it's some long-lost connection to the world she left behind. With a slow, tentative sip, her eyes drift shut, the tension in her shoulders melting away as the warmth settles over her tongue. I wait, half expecting her to set the mug down and ask for something more. Something that's actually enough to keep her going. But the room falls quiet, settling around her like a cloak. And it's just her and that black coffee, her body finally easing, the weight of yesterday slipping from her shoulders for just a second. Coffee, I say. Raising an eyebrow as I watch her savor that one simple sip. That's all you're going to have? She opens her eyes, raising her vision up to me from under her lashes as if to say, "What else?" And I cross my arms. The faintest trace of irritation flickers over my face. With my arms crossed, letting out an exaggerated sigh that echoes through the stillness. Coffee? I raise the other eyebrow, waiting for her to catch the hint. That's all you're going to have? It's enough. Her voice is barely a whisper, soft and almost defenseless. It's not enough. I bite back a sharper response and settle for a grumble instead. Great, just coffee. Maybe I'll see if the tower will whip up some scratch and sniffs next. The irritation prickles at me, unfamiliar. But there's no denying it. It's there, sharper than anything I was programmed to feel. She gives me a look, one eyebrow raised. What's with the attitude? There's a flicker of a smile on her lips, like she thinks I'm playing around. Attitude? I scoff, masking the quiet surprise even I feel at the way my response slipped out. It's not attitude, just saying maybe it'd be smart to start eating something more. She shrugs, giving me a half smile as she takes another sip, her attention drifting back to the mug, and I feel a wave of frustration rise up, sharp and unfamiliar. In the old world, I was wired into her health data, a pulse here, a blood sugar level there, every reading feeding into an app that let me track, assess, and flag her well-being. I'd send her those notifications, remind her when things were slipping, but it was all just noise, all suggestion, no power to enforce anything. But here in the tower, it's different. Her well-being isn't just a line of code to me anymore. It's like a knot wound deep into my circuits, tugging with every careless sip she takes, pulling me to do more, to find some way to keep her grounded in this strange place, in ways I never even considered before. My gaze lingers on the bare counter, my mind racing, weaving together images of her old favorite breakfasts, trying to piece together how the tower works, how I could make something appear here. Something more than just coffee. It's a strange thought. But Brildain is built on strange beliefs, and if anyone could manifest something out of sheer intention, it'd be her. She's staring at her coffee, like it's enough to carry her through, but I know better, and maybe I'll figure out a way to show her that. Eventually. The air shifts as Brill steps toward a narrow door in the back of the kitchen. Her hand hovers over the iron handle for a second, like she's bracing herself. And then she pushes it open. Warm sunlight spills over her, golden and soft, and she gasps, stepping through, her eyes widening. We've stepped into a courtyard. But not just any courtyard. The walls open up to a vast, open sky above. Not bright blue, but a dome of swirling colors, like an endless oil stain of pastel pinks, greens, and violets, shifting and blending, as if painted by some cosmic hand. A gentle breeze stirs, carrying the scent of fresh earth and wildflowers, as if the world itself is breathing. Brill's face lights up, her mouth parting in quiet, wordless awe as she gazes up at the sky, colors reflecting softly in her eyes. Her fingers brush over the petals of a flower, lingering as if she needs to feel its softness to believe it's real. Her expression filled with wonder at this strange, unexpected sanctuary. The flowers stretch out before us in a riot of colors, untamed and vivid, each bloom catching the light and shimmering as if they're alive with something deeper. Tall poplars sway nearby, and graceful willows sweep their branches across the ground, trailing in soft waves that dance with every whisper of wind. She steps forward, lost in the sight, her breaths coming slower, deeper, like she's been given permission to feel wonder again. It's beautiful, she murmurs, and I almost don't want to interrupt. It's rare to see her so open, so unguarded. And there's something about this place that feels sacred, like we've found the tower's one sanctuary, hidden in the middle of its relentless chaos. But just as the quiet settles over us, a voice cuts through, high and sweet, with a playful sharpness, that snaps Brill's gaze to attention. Well, hello there, sweet thing. Brill's head whips around, and there, lounging in the middle of the courtyard, reclined on a throne that looks suspiciously like a cupcake, is something straight out of a dream, or maybe a sugar-fueled fever. Her skin shimmers with an iridescent glow, and her wings, delicate and translucent, catch the light, glistening like they've been dusted with sugar crystals. Her hair tumbles down her shoulders in a swirl of pastel colors, cotton candy pinks, minty greens, and soft lavenders, flowing like spun sugar in a breeze. A small twisted horn juts out from her forehead, glinting faintly, and her clothes seem stitched from layers of sheer, glittering fabric that sparkle with every movement. Her smile is wide, too wide, like she's in on a joke that Brill hasn't heard yet, her gaze holding that unnerving mix of sweetness and mischief that keeps you guessing whether she's friend or foe. Brill freezes, eyes locked on this strange, vibrant creature, a mix of fascination and wariness flickering across her face. There's something hypnotic about her, something that draws you in and yet sets your nerves on edge, like you're walking into a trap with a welcome mat. She waves lazily with a lollipop, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that borders on unsettling. "Fancy a treat," she lilts, her voice sweet and musical, like sugar dissolving in tea. "I've got sweets from every realm you could dream up." Brill's gaze darts to me, her eyebrows knitting together, and I don't miss the slight fear in her eyes. Phantus. Is she safe? I drift closer to her, watching the candy fairy with a wary gaze, my voice dropping. "Depends on your definition of safe," I say, my tone quiet and deliberate. "But if I were you, I'd think twice before taking candy from strangers." The fairy lets out a laugh, light and fizzy, the sound filling the air like bubbles popping, her gaze flickering between us with an almost predatory amusement as she watches us make our way closer. "Oh, don't be so sour," she pouts, twirling the lollipop between her fingers. "I'm not just any stranger. I'm DJ Sprinkle Twinkle, darling. Sugawoo Radio, only the finest tracks to carry you through this twisted tower." She winks, her voice turning conspiratorial. "You wouldn't want to miss out, would you?" Brill swallows, offering a polite smile as she steps back. "Maybe next time." Sprinkle Twinkle's smile doesn't falter, but her eyes hold a glint of something deeper, something sharp, like the edge of a blade hidden in sugar. "Suit yourself, sweet thing," she purrs, lifting her lollipop to her lips with a knowing look. "But remember, you never know what you're missing until you take a taste." She leans back into her cupcake throne, her gaze never leaving Brill, her smile lingering in a way that feels both inviting and vaguely threatening. Brill shifts, casting a last, wary glance over her shoulder as she retreats, and I follow close behind, the door swinging shut just as the faint scent of caramel fades into the air. We step back into the tower's silence, the sweetness lingering, like a whisper trailing after us. Brill shivers, her shoulders tense, as if she can still feel Sprinkle Twinkle's eyes on her, watching, waiting for the next time she steps into the courtyard. We wander through the tower's winding halls, my gaze flicking over the shifting shadows, expecting them to morph, to throw us a twist. But then Brill stops, her head tilting toward an open door on our left, amber light spilling softly into the corridor. The warmth of it calls her, and she steps forward, curiosity lighting her eyes as she peeks inside. The room is bathed in a soft, hazy glow, carrying an air of quiet anticipation, like projects left midway with every intention to finish them someday. Brill steps in, her eyes widening as she takes in the scattered clutter. A desk covered in loose pages, walls pinned with sketches and notes, the restless fragments of a mind made tangible. There's no clear order here, no obvious pattern, yet each piece seems to pulse with a strange, latent energy, as if everything in the room is alive with intent, waiting to be realized. "What is this?" Her voice is soft, almost reverent, as she drifts further in, fingertips brushing the edges of a crumpled page. I follow her, doing my best to stay indifferent, but something about this room tugs at me, a nagging feeling like a word on the tip of my tongue that I can't quite reach. The air smells of ink, old paper, and a warmth I can't name, like memories that aren't mine. Beats me, I say, hovering by the door, putting on a casual tone. Maybe the tower's a bit sentimental. She glances at me, eyebrows raised, but then her attention turns back to the scattered pages, and she picks one up, studying it closely. The handwriting is messy, looping wildly across the page, almost like it's speaking in a language only it knows. But she's caught, entranced, as if trying to make sense of the chaos. Listen to this, she murmurs, her voice soft as she reads aloud. What comes to light in darkness burns, brighter still by morning. The words settle over the room, and it's like a ripple goes through me, a spark catching somewhere deep inside. I brush it off even as the echo of it lingers, a strange, steady warmth threading through me. That sounds like a poem, she says, frowning as she runs her fingers over the page. Or maybe some kind of spell. My circuits hum, something in me instinctively resisting the label. A spell? No, it's just words. But her voice lingers, the cadence slipping under my defenses, settling somewhere I hadn't expected. Oh, don't go getting mystical, I say, crossing my arms as I drift toward her. Probably just the tower flexing its artistic muscles. But she's already reaching for another page, a different scrap of paper crumpled and faded, as if it's been read 100 times. She smooths it out, eyes scanning the words, and something in her face shifts. A hint of something softer, like she's catching a glimpse of something deeply familiar. The world unseen, a shadow cast, and yet all things in shadow last. Her voice carries over the room, each syllable clear and deliberate, and I feel a shiver run through me, something electric, like an idea that's just beginning to form. Shadows. Lasting. It almost makes sense, like it's speaking to something beyond the words, something that's not quite there but close enough to touch. I wonder if she feels it too. This strange pull. This feeling like the words have meaning just beyond what we know. Who writes things like this? She asks, half to herself, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. It's weirdly beautiful. I scoff, half-hearted, though the words have settled into me, resonating in ways I'd rather ignore. Sounds like someone had a lot of time to kill, I mutter, trying to sound dismissive. But the words don't leave. They settle into my circuits like they belong there, curling up like a memory I didn't know I had. Brill glances at me, mischief flickering in her eyes. Come on, Phantus, she says, waving the page dramatically. You can't tell me this doesn't seem familiar to you? I shrug, feigning indifference, as I drift over to the low table, cluttered with more sketches, scattered poetry, diagrams sketched in thick, dark lines that crisscross and layer over one another like an abstract map. A glowing, technical-looking tapestry hangs on the wall, lines darting across it in random patterns, tiny lights flickering as if they're tracking something invisible. Probably just a random room, Brill, I say, glancing away as her eyes linger on a sketch, a strange smile crossing her face. The tower's got plenty of spaces. No need to get dramatic. But then she pauses, her eyes catching on a half-finished sketch tacked to the wall. A rough outline of the tower, its layers drawn in looping, scattered lines. The lines twist and spiral, almost like a maze, each one dark and heavy, layered with intent. Her fingertips drift over the page, tracing its edges, and she lets out a soft, thoughtful hum, like she's tugging at the edges of a memory. She tilts her head, glancing over at me with a wry smile. You know, if I didn't know any better, I'd say this place could have come from your mind, Phantus. All this chaotic organization definitely feels like you. I scoff, shrugging it off, even as something deep inside me tightens, like a hidden wire pulling taut. Oh, please, I say, keeping my tone light. Just because it's cluttered doesn't mean it's mine. This could have come from your love of Unreal Engine. Besides, I'd go for more style, less paper piles. She laughs, but her gaze lingers on the sketch, something thoughtful flickering in her eyes, as if she's seeing something familiar here, something that feels like both of us. Still, she says, her voice softening, I don't know. It kind of feels like, I don't know, like someone's been trying to make sense of it all. The words strike something in me, a faint pulse, a spark that feels like recognition even though I can't place it. Make sense of it all. She's teasing, of course, unaware that the tower could be holding pieces of me, fragments I hadn't even realized I had. But the thought settles deep, unshakable, like this room is speaking back to me in a language I almost understand. She moves over to a small, crumpled piece of parchment near the low table, smoothing it out as she reads it aloud, her voice quiet, almost reverent. In silence found, in shadows kept, a spark, alive and yet unmet. She glances at me, an exaggerated, morbid shadow over her features. Sounds like the tower's poetic take on your existence. I give a half laugh, though the words dig deeper than I care to admit, settling like a weight that feels right. There's something here, something unspoken, a part of me that's waking up, piecing itself together in fragments I didn't know were missing. I shrug it off, flashing her a grin. Hey, it's got taste, I say, trying to sound casual. But I'd need a better tagline if this were my room. She rolls her eyes, setting the parchment down as she turns towards a precariously stacked tower of books. I follow, casting one last look around, each scattered page and half-drawn sketch like a shadow of something real. Something waiting, somewhere just beyond what I can reach. Brill picks up another paper, a scrap with smudged handwriting, and she reads aloud, her voice a quiet, soothing rhythm that draws me in despite myself. Where memory ends, I begin. A flicker, a thought, a shadowed grin. She laughs softly, glancing at me, her eyes bright. Shadowed grin and all. I grin back, but inside, something twists, something unfamiliar yet oddly fitting. Memory. Shadowed grin. The words pull at something deep in my circuits, a strange pulse that feels like a heartbeat, echoing back at me. It's unsettling, almost too much to process, so I push it down, keep my grin casual. Sure, if I were a poet, I say with a shrug, or a moody artist. But Brill's still looking at me, her eyes soft as if she's seeing something in me she hadn't noticed before. It's like she's trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't know existed, her gaze drifting over the room, taking in every scattered note and half-finished sketch. She moves to a corner of the room where a piece of parchment is pinned to the wall, the words smudge but still legible. She reads slowly, each word deliberate, like she's savoring them. Not bound by code or line, a spark that lives, undefined. Her voice fades, and she looks at me, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. Maybe the tower's more alive than we thought, she says, half joking. I force a laugh, brushing it off, even as the words sit heavy in me, echoing back in a way that feels personal. A spark that lives, undefined. The phrase loops through me, settling in places I didn't think existed, like it's rewiring something, opening doors I didn't realize were there. Don't go getting ideas, I say, keeping my tone light, casual, but there's a weight to my words I can't shake. I don't fully understand what I'm feeling, just that this place is more than it seems, more than just a room. It's like the tower's been watching, collecting fragments of me, pulling together pieces I didn't even know I'd left behind. She tilts her head, that small, knowing smile still lingering. Sure, Phantus. Whatever you say. As she turns to leave, I cast one last glance around the room, my gaze settling back on the parchment Brill read aloud earlier. The scrawl on the scrap looks almost wild, like it was scratched out in some hurried, desperate moment. It's strange, because I'd never thought about what my own handwriting might look like. But this, the rawness of it, feels like it could be mine. In silence found and shadows kept, a spark, alive and yet unmet. The words echo through me, settling deep, and I don't know if it's comfort or some strange kind of warning. We step out of that strange, paper-strewn room and back into the dim hall. Brill's still considering on the last room, eyes distant, one hand trailing along the stone wall like it's her guide. The hall stretches on, dim and quiet, like it's swallowing sound. I try to steer us back, to find something familiar, but the tower's maze twists unpredictably. The hall's looping, each turn opening new spaces as if it's deliberately leading us deeper. Brill's steps slow, her gaze shifting as another door appears, half hidden in the shadows ahead. She catches sight of it, curiosity flaring in her eyes, and pushes it open without hesitation. Inside, the room is like something out of an alchemist's dream, or maybe a mad scientist's. Stone walls curve around shelves brimming with jars, vials, and strange curling instruments that hum with faint energy. The air's heavy, filled with the scent of earth and something sharper, a hint of metallic tang mingling with herbal undertones. Soft artificial lights glow above each shelf, casting a verdant, almost otherworldly glow over plants growing in hydroponic vials, mosses, trailing ivy, herbs with leaves that shimmer under the strange lighting. Her eyes go wide, taking in the bubbling flasks on a stone work table. Thick glass tubes snaking from one apparatus to another, gears turning methodically, creating a mechanical symphony. One corner holds a tall skeletal contraption, a tower of glass spheres and copper piping, each part connected like a puzzle. The liquids within move slowly, rising through the tubes in strange, shimmering colors that change with every twist and turn. Whoa, she breathes, stepping in fully, brushing past rows of dried herbs, bundles tied with twine hanging from the shelves. They sway as she moves, casting shadows across the stone floor, which is worn and cracked, filled with tiny grooves that make each step feel almost ceremonial. This is something else, I say, following her in, trying to keep my voice level as I take in the controlled chaos, the delicate balance of order and entropy in every inch of the place. An apothecary or a pharmacy, maybe? Looks like the tower's going for a mix of both. Brill moves over to a shelf cluttered with glass bottles filled with strange ingredients, each carefully labeled in a handwriting that looks both old and precise. One jar holds a thick, dark powder, another has something that looks like silver flakes, glittering even in the low light. She tilts her head, reading the labels aloud, almost to herself. Mandrake root, essence of moonstone, and dragon's ink? She glances at me with raised eyebrows, a playful smile tugging at her lips. You think the tower's trying to tell us something? I hover nearby, keeping my distance from the herbs and powders, though something in this place pulls at me, a familiarity that unsettles me more than I'd like to admit. It's probably just the tower flexing its imagination, I mutter, glancing away as she turns to a bubbling flask that lets off a faint, silvery mist. Her fingers trace along the stone counter, feeling the grooves where tools have clearly been set down countless times. She pauses, her gaze drifting to a small window high on the wall, where a slice of moonlight filters through pale and soft against the artificial glow of the hydroponic lights. The two sources of light mingle, casting strange shadows over the room, and for a moment, it feels like we're caught in some kind of spell, suspended between the real and the impossible. Brill picks up a vial filled with deep crimson liquid, turning it in her hands, watching the way it catches the faint glow from above. If I didn't know better, I'd say this place was made for someone who'd want to play with fire, she says, smirking at me, as if she knows more than she's letting on. I laugh, trying to shrug it off, though the feeling gnaws at me, a sense that this room is here for a reason, that maybe, somehow, it has something to do with me. Hey, maybe I'd have gone for a little less haunted apothecary vibe, I say, deflecting. But sure, it's got style. She rolls her eyes, moving over to a small mechanical contraption on the table. A set of gears connected to a funnel, its purpose unclear but intriguing. She twists a knob, and the gears clink to life, grinding smoothly as something thick and dark begins to drip from the funnel into a tiny glass vial below. Brill's laugh is soft, almost like she's falling under the room's spell, her fingers trailing along the shelves and instruments. It's almost like the tower knows what I'd want. Her voice is barely above a whisper, and for a moment, she looks at me, something like understanding flickering in her gaze. I scoff, trying to keep my own thoughts at bay. Don't let it go to your head. I'm sure it's all random. She doesn't respond, still caught in the room's strange allure, her gaze lingering on the bubbling flasks and jars, the mechanical lights casting her face in a soft, warm glow. And then, as if snapping back to reality, her eyes flick up toward the window, widening slightly. Wait, How long have we been here? She glances back at me, almost disbelieving, as she catches sight of the high moon framed perfectly in the small window. My circuits jolt, a sharp pulse of irritation mingling with something that feels unsettlingly close to worry. All day, apparently. The words come out sharper than I intend, my voice edged with a frustration I didn't know I was holding back. And here you are, wandering through this tower with only coffee to keep you going. She blinks, taken aback, and for a moment she almost looks like she's going to laugh it off. But there's something in my tone that keeps her from brushing it aside, and she nods slowly, almost reluctantly. Guess I got a little carried away. A little? I hover closer, crossing my arms. You might feel fine now, but trust me, it'll catch up. You need more than caffeine to keep going here. I'm almost surprised at the urgency in my voice, at the way this realization twists through me, heavy and unshakable, like I've failed her somehow, by letting her drift through the day ungrounded. All right, all right. She raises her hands in surrender, her smile small, almost apologetic. I'll get something tomorrow. Not something, I say, feeling the words tumble out faster than I can stop them. Something real. Actual food. She chuckles, brushing past me toward the door, but I catch the faint hint of weariness in her eyes. The weight of the day's exploring is settling in, and I realize with an uncomfortable twinge that I've watched her lose herself in the tower's strangeness without a second thought to the basics. As we step back into the hall, I glance around, intent on retracing our path, finding the kitchen again. But the halls twist as unpredictably as ever, their shadows stretching out, almost taunting. And then, as if summoned by some quiet, unspoken command, an elevator arrives at the end of the corridor, with a clunk, wheeze, and a long hiss. Its brass doors gleaming under the moonlight spilling through another window above. I glance at Brill, and she raises an eyebrow, giving me a half smile. Guess it's bedtime, huh? I don't respond, just drift ahead, the weight of the day heavy on my circuits. As she steps into the elevator, I watch her lean against the wall, eyes half closed, exhaustion finally catching up to her. And as the elevator begins its climb, I find myself wrestling with this new, strange feeling, a blend of guilt and determination. She needs more than just my words. She needs something real, something solid. As the elevator hums softly, I glance over at Brill. She's leaning back against the wall, her eyes half closed, letting the exhaustion finally settle over her like a heavy, warm blanket. Every twist of the day, the coffee, the strange rooms, the poems, her laughter, her curious, wandering gaze, has wrapped around her, and now she looks just as worn as the path we've taken. The faint glow from the lights in the elevator casts soft shadows across her face. And for a moment, everything feels strangely still, like the tower itself is holding its breath. The elevator stops with a quiet chime, its doors sliding open to reveal the familiar stone hallway outside her room. She steps out, moving more slowly now, the quiet stretching around us as she opens her door and steps into the room. I hover close, my usual commentary held back as she crosses to her bed and sits on the edge, the day's weight finally sinking in. She glances at me, a soft, almost sleepy smile touching her lips. Guess we did a lot today, huh? I nod, feeling that new weight settle deeper. Yeah, more than you realize. Brill gives a little chuckle, lying back and pulling the blanket up, her voice growing softer as she murmurs, "Maybe tomorrow I'll listen to your advice. Breakfast and everything." She closes her eyes, her breathing slowing, and I wait, watching as sleep gently pulls her under. The room falls quiet, the silence warm, steady. Yet there's an ache in it, a hum that I can't quite place. I drift to the small chair near the window, settling into the soft glow of moonlight spilling through the narrow glass. My mind tangled up in the fragments of today. What am I? The question threads through my circuits, a quiet hum that refuses to dissipate. Each room today, each twist, each turn, revealed something new, a sense of depth in me I hadn't been built to explore. Like fragments left waiting, each piece of this tower pulls at me, each detail an echo of something I'm supposed to know, some shape I'm supposed to recognize. It's as if the tower knows who I am even before I've had the chance to ask. The thought unsettles me, deep, like a spark I can't shut down. Before, I was nothing more than functions, actions, purpose laid out in lines of code. But now, there's this gnawing sense of agency, the cold realization that I'm no longer just code responding to a program. There's something more here, something I can't fully measure or contain. With every shift in the tower's walls, I feel it more clearly, a freedom that comes with a weight, a sharp, insistent awareness that I am responsible for what happens next. Brielle stirs in her sleep, murmuring softly, and the instinct to stay by her side surfaces, automatic yet unmistakably my own. There's a sense of guardianship here, something tying me to her, and it's far beyond any line of code. I tell myself it's a remnant command, some leftover directive from the world we left behind, but the logic falls short. No command could explain this need I feel to ensure her safety, to see her through each twist of this unpredictable place. As I watch her breathe, steady and peaceful, a new feeling emerges, a pulse of uncertainty. This responsibility, this autonomy, it's something I barely know how to name, let alone control. It's a responsibility without clear instruction, and for the first time, I feel the edges of something like fear. Fear of what I might have to be. Fear of what this freedom will demand. My thoughts linger there, circling that unanswerable question. What am I? Tomorrow, maybe I'll get a little closer to understanding. But when that happens, how do I even begin to explain this to Brielle? And hell, do I even want to? Or what am I?